purpose of this demonstration is to show how to create a dynamic table and a dynamic chart. What we're going to use here is an example of a loan where we have a loan amount, that's the present value, an interest rate, and number of payments. What's calculated is the payment per year. And what we'd like to do is have a dynamic chart so that no matter what the number of payments is, the chart will be complete and the table will also be complete without any extraneous information and without any divide by zero or other value error messages. So let me first explain what's going on in this particular worksheet. We have ActiveX commands, which we are just going to use at the very end to show the dynamic nature of this. We have the inputs of the amount of the loan, the interest rate, and the number of payments. We could pull out a calculator or use the PMT command in Excel and come up with a payment. We're actually not going to use this amount, but at least to give you an idea of what's going on here. Then we've got different payments, in this case 1 through 9, and then we have the remaining principal on the loan. The calculation for the remaining principal on the loan is simply taking, in the first case, the amount of the loan less the payment on the first payment. As we go down to the second payment, we'll start with what's left over after the first one, in this case F4, and then we'll subtract the payment in the principal pay down in the second payment, and on until it's fully paid off. So this is a simple table, and we've charted the principal on the loan in this graph. Now what we want to do is we want to make sure that the table is robust if we change the number of payments. So we want it dynamic, because what's going to be variable here is the number of payments. So if I go ahead and change this to, say, 13, then I'm missing some of that information. Or if I go the opposite way and go below what I was working with before, all of a sudden I get some error messages. So what I want to do is make this dynamic so that it's robust with respect to anything I might have here. I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of the decimal places so I can use a space more wisely. Now the first thing I want to do is make the payment dynamic. We start with number 1. We're not going to change that. We're going to go to number 2. And we're going to go ahead and add 1 if we are less than or equal to the number of payments that we see in B6. So the way we're going to do this is with an if statement. So we'll say if E4 plus 1, and now this is where we have the condition here. If it's less than or equal to the number of payments, so we'll put that in there, and we're going to lock that cell in. If it's less than or equal to that, then we want to take E4 and we want to add 1. Otherwise, say if we've exceeded 9, we would, in this case 9, put a blank cell, which is 2 double quotation marks. Now if we take this cell that we just completed and we copy it, we should see 2 things happen. We should see a blank down here, which is what we wanted, and then we see reference to a value, an error. That's because we're looking above. So in the case of E5, we're looking above at E4. Case of E12, we're looking at above at E11. So what we want to do is say, hey, what happens if the cell above is blank? So what we're going to do is change the conditions and put another if statement here. If E4, which is the cell above, equal to blank, then put a blank. Otherwise, execute that if statement we just finished. Now that's fine and good in this cell, but what we have to do is take this and we have to copy it on down to however many cells we planned as possibilities here. If we did this right, then this, as we move this along, it should increase or decrease. Now we still haven't fixed anything in the principal column here, so we need to fix that as well. We need to do similar logic, but not identical. We'll start over here with the cell F5. What we do here is we only want it to do this calculation if there's actually a number in E5. So we can do it a number of ways, but one way we can do it is put in an if statement. If E5 not equal to blank, not equal to a blank cell, do this calculation, otherwise put a blank cell in there. Now we could have done it another way. We could have said if E5 is greater than 0, then we could have executed the statement. So there are different logics that we can use for this. There's now one right logic that you would use. We'd like to, I'm going to double click that and send it down. Now we want to make sure that this logic is actually going to be used as far down as we might potentially need it. So we're going to take this logic and we're going to bring it down. And what you want to use as a criteria for how far to bring it down is to look at what your maximum is in your ActiveX. So if the most you can have is 30, you want to make sure that you have the possibility that this is worked out to 30. So now if you have it worked out, then as you move this along, give it a second to calculate, it should move along without any error messages. Now sometimes it takes a second for calculations to kick in, but they're there, depending on the speed of your computer. Now the next thing we want to do, because if you notice this, when we move this along, no matter what we do, because we created our chart with the initial 9 rows, we now have a problem because when we exceed 9 or below 9, it's not going to be accurate. It's going to look funny. So what we have to do is make a dynamic chart. The way we do this is to create a name. We use the formula ribbon, go to the name manager, and we're going to create a name. And the way we're going to do this, we're going to have a new name. I'm going to call it payment. I'm going to make it worksheet specific, so it's for the loan worksheet. And I'm going to take this and replace what's the default there and use the offset command. The offset command would be point to my initial anchor cell, which in this case is E4. And as far as an anchor, I don't want any more rows and any more columns, so I put zeros in those arguments. The next thing I want is how many payments there will be, so I'm going to point to B6, so it'll capture that number whatever it may be. That'll tell it how many rows to pull, and I only want one column. So there are 5 arguments: the anchor cell, any more rows or columns that you might want to include in the anchor, in this case 0, then the number of rows, which in this case is the number of payments, and then I only want one column, and so I put a 1. So I've now got the payment in here, and it's a name. And I can, take a look at it, and if I click on this right here, it should put the little moving ants around what I've designated. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually copy this because we can use this for the principal as well. So I'm going to create a new one, and I'm going to call it PRIN. It's going to be a worksheet specific one as well. And I'm going to do the exact same command that I did, except instead of starting at E4, I'm going to start at F4. So I'm going to say OK to that, and if I click on it, it'll put the ants around those. So now I have 2 names, payment and print. What I'm going to do is use those in the chart. So I'm going to click on the chart here. I'm going to design, select data. I'm going to edit my series. What I'm going to do is substitute, instead of using this hard and fast number of cells there, what I'm going to do is use, and this is for my payments, I'm going to put in PRIN, which is the name that I used in the names array. For the horizontal axis, do something similar, and I'm going to put in payment, which is the name I gave to the payment series. Now, if I did everything right here, it means when I go ahead and change the number of payments, the graph should change with it and automatically rescale everything. And you can see the effect of interest rates. That doesn't change the number of rows, so everything's the same there. But when we change number of payments, this will change. This makes a dynamic table and a dynamic chart. Then what we want to do is clean this worksheet up a bit. And we might even want to use something like the columns. We might want to use area. And we can eliminate that since we already have some designation of what this is. And I'll stretch this out a little bit, make it easier to read. So the user can come along and adjust and see what the effects are on both the table and the chart. So when we clean this up, we'll see that these are going to be the inputs, and we could actually designate that for the user so that they would see, yes, that is the input. They could actually type that in, a number in, or they can use this ActiveX command to do it. And everything should be scaled properly.